Just like Mal, I'm now based in the UK, as Dwayne has mentioned there. Not 13 years, as it has been for Mal, 6 years for me, and it's just so good to come back to Australia and be amongst people who speak English. Maybe Mal's had this experience. I was walking down, when we first got to Oxford, I was walking down Cornmarket, which is kind of the main shopping area of the town, and the phone rang behind Merrin and me as we were walking down, and I kid you not, the guy answered like this. "Oh, Lord Astonbury, how marvellous to hear from you." Merrin and I looked at each other and said, well, I guess, Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. Now compare that to coming back to Sydney, and I'm sitting on the train heading into Sydney one morning, and the conductor comes on the PA system and he says, "I'd just like to remind everyone, it's not appropriate to put your feet on the chairs. So if you've got your feet on the chairs, now would be a good time to take your feet off the chairs. That means you there in car 4. Yes, I can see you. And while you're at it, go and get yourself a haircut. I'm home." So good. Well, 6 years in England, and it is an amazing place. It really is. It is a land. Well, this is what we're going to be speaking on. It's a land of rolling hills, friends, and it's a land of castles, and it's a land of natural wonders like this. Not natural, but ancient wonders. This is only an hour's drive south from my place, just saying. It's the land that gave us Roxy Music, and it gave us Coldplay, it gave us Florence and the Machine, yes, and not forgetting, it gave the world, nobody's taken it up yet, but it gave the world the Morris dance. Brits are a brave race, are they not? Imagine trying that in Cavill Avenue tonight. How long do you think you'd last? I live in Oxford. This is the place where Handel performed in the Sheldonian Theatre, and Shakespeare used to lodge right here when it was a tavern. C.S. Lewis wrote the Narnia Chronicles in a little house just up the road and around the corner from me. Just saying. It's actually a little bit further than that, but anyway. He wrote actually in this desk, "Rubbing the glory in, just rubbing the glory in." How can you not love a country that gave us the train and the telephone and the television, not to forget bog snorkeling? Take your tetanus shot before you try that one. The World Toe Wrestling Championships. I kid you not, it is a thing. The Yorkshire Pudding Boat Race. Actually made of dough, yes it is. And my favourite, maybe it's Mal's as well, the Gloucester Cheese Chase. Is this not a great country or what? The only beef I have with England is the fact that I was born here, actually just in Brisbane up the road, but I was born to English parents, so I always had a kind of like a Pommy accent. I got beaten up in Cleveland Primary School, an hour up the road from here, because I sounded like a Pommy. 35 years later, I moved to Pommy land, and they think I'm South African. Where is the justice in that? I've paid a high price for this accent, I really have. It's an amazing place. England is a fantastic place. It's a beautiful place. It's an innovative place. It's a quirky place. But you know what? It's also got its problems. Within weeks of us arriving in 2011, we arrived to the London riots. Not long ago, a very high-level pedophilia ring was revealed to have been operating right under our noses in that beautiful, historic town of Oxford. The Syrian refugee crisis is happening all around us. Friends, Australia is so removed from the world's problems, I can tell you now. So removed. In the UK, you just feel like it's happening all around you. And I'll tell you, things are happening all around you. Islamist terror attacks in Paris and Brussels and Nice, and now they've happened on our very own shores. And this has got me thinking very much about this idea. How do we speak hope as Christian communicators? How do we speak hope into a beautiful yet a broken world? How do we go about that? And this speaks directly to our theme, because hope looks to the future, and legacy builds for the future. Hope says, keep walking towards the future, and legacy builds a pathway for us to walk. So if you're interested, like I am, in trying to work out how can we speak hope to a broken world, we can take some notes, I think, from a couple of artists. Now, don't get too worried. I'm not going to go too highfalutin on this. I'm a bit of an amateur at this myself. This is a guy named Thomas Kinkade. Anybody heard of Thomas Kinkade? Okay, right. Okay, you're woohooing. That's going to be a problem very soon. Thomas died 5 years ago, but not before leaving something of a legacy himself. Incredibly successful at marketing his paintings and his prints, not to mention the jigsaw puzzles and the placemats and the figurines and the snow globes all around the world. 1 in 20 Americans has a Thomas Kinkade print on their walls. Maybe your mum and dad does too, maybe you do, certainly later up the back does. Thomas Kinkade was very, very successful. In fact, to get a big blown-up print here in Australia will cost you about $1,000. So he's been pretty good, and he created a world, and he certainly is a gifted artist, and he presented a vision of the world that people wanted to buy and continue to buy. It's a world of cosy cottages with pretty gates and flowers in full bloom and softly smoking chimneys. It's a world of gentle streams and dappled light and farms with perfect lawns and not a cow pat in sight. There are no storms, thorns, or vicious wolves in this world, but there are pretty white chapels in the wilderness. What's that doing there? There are no cities, cars, pain, or crime, just rainbows and romance and frolicking white stallions in the distance. Like romantic artists before him who painted a world without blemish, like commercial artists today who present a world that's perfected by brands, like Christian artists today who give us a Jesus who is all about lambs, lambs, lambs. What is it about Jesus and lambs? Except, my friends, when he's dining with supermodels. Aren't you glad the tiger's there? Thomas Kinkade gave us a vision of the world that is all sweet and lovely and beautiful, and it's as sweet and silky and smooth as chocolate. Obviously, it's brought comfort to millions, but here's my question, friends. Has Thomas Kinkade created hope, or has he just created sentimentality? Steve Cutts is a London-based artist, and he sees the world a little bit differently to Kinkade. To him, the world is, I quote, massively overrated, highly undernourishing. It's full of crushed dreams and lasting disappointment. Wouldn't you love to have coffee with this guy? It's a world where we join the rat race and let the light drain from our eyes as we take trains to nowhere. Here's what he thinks those big brand names are doing to our brains. And I would certainly think twice, Nathan and the team, before you invite him to speak at next year's Connect conference. He hasn't got the fondest idea of digital media. So just like him, political cartoonists of the ages and other artists like Banksy and people like him, people like Steve Cutts, they've got some important things to say about the world and where today's pursuits will take us. But here's my question, folks. I ask my question. Has Steve Cutts created hope or just cynicism? See, the message that comes out of Thomas Kinkade is everything is beautiful, the world is beautiful, and Jesus is cuddling his little lambs and he's blowing kisses in the air, and everything's fine. It's all about lambs, 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 lambs. In theological terms, this is all creation and no fall. Everything is good, everything's fine, everything's pretty. In fact, that's what Thomas Kinkade was kind of saying he was doing. He was creating the world as if it hadn't had a fall, a Genesis 3 moment where everything goes wrong. Its whole language is very much about perfection, it's all about positivity, and it's all about sweetness. And I hope I don't lose any friends, and maybe Mal's already started to lose some friends, because were you here yesterday, Mal? Yesterday was the social media day, and great stuff in there. And I think Niels did a really good job of showing us, 50% inspirational content for our social media channels, and then do other things with the other 50%. But if our channels, if our stations, if our social media feeds are all about cutesy and sweet as chocolate, if our blog posts are full of success stories, and if our channels are full of feel-good moments, and our Instagram feeds are all full of beautiful people with big smiling faces and straight teeth and big pockets and size 12 waists, I wonder if we are not channeling the spirit of Kinkade. If we are always putting out pastel-tinted memes and streams and butterflies and pussycats and things like that, are we not in some way incarnating that kind of thing? The message of Steve Cutts is everything is broken, it's full of crushed dreams, it's all going to end in death. In theological terms, this is all fall and no redemption. Its language is provocation and protest, and I wonder to myself if our channels and our feeds are all about kind of hitting out about everything that's wrong about the world. It's the liberals, or the Labours, or it's safe schools, or Islam, or whatever it might be. If that's all we're doing, I wonder if we are not, in fact, channeling the spirit of Steve Cutts. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a place for both these things, but if this is all we do, I don't think we've reached our calling. I was in the US in October on a speaking trip, and if we've traveled together for a little while, I know many of us have, you know that my thing was kind of talkback radio. I did the open house show, and I was very, very keen to explore that further. And so I was really keen to kind of join my American comrades and hear what they were doing, and I was flicking around the AM stations. And I don't know whether they all conspired against me. I don't know whether they were all playing a practical joke on me. But wherever I went, every city I went to, no matter which station it was, somehow I seemed to catch the same thing. Sermon after sermon on the seventh seal in the book of Revelation, and the book of Daniel, and the coming judgment of God, and how the gays and the homosexuals and the abortionists, they are going to be the first hit, man. And people who are frothing at the mouth, talkback hosts who are so passionate, frothing at the mouth, speaking against the liberal agenda that was taking over the states. Which one do you think that is? Which one do you think that is? After a little while, I then flicked on satellite radio, which America does so well. And there I came across a channel dedicated to a very well-known Christian leader, very good-looking, nice hair, big smile, straight teeth. And I don't know whether he saw me coming. I don't know whether he conspired against me to play a practical joke on me. But no matter what time I switched in, no matter what time I started listening, I seemed to hear the same message, just in slightly different words. The world is beautiful and God is good and everything's happy, and if you've got any problems, just think better and it'll all go away because Jesus is cuddling his lambs. Again, it's not that we shouldn't do the first. It's a broken world, and sometimes we just need some respite, right? We just need to be reminded that actually there's goodness and beauty in the world, even in this brokenness that we have all around us. And I tell you what, there's a place for the second as well. There's a place for actually calling things out and saying, look, this has got to stop. There is something wrong and something needs to be dealt with here. But can I suggest that if you've stayed at one of those two alone, you haven't yet reached your calling as a distinctly Christian communicator. Because there is a third option. And I've picked a third artist for this. He's not a Christian. His name is El Cid. He is a French artist. He was born actually in Paris, but his family are from Tunisia. He takes Arabic script and he paints it on walls. He calls it calligraffiti. Do you like that? Calligraffiti. And while he's kind of had all this time in Paris, he really goes back to his roots, and he based this whole artistic theme at one stage on Tunisia. And so he went into that war-torn country, and he went to the remote places where nobody goes and where the people feel forgotten there. He found an abandoned wall, and with their permission, he put up a message like this: Tamula, land of my ancestors, there's no one like you. One of the locals said, sometimes you need somebody to come from the outside to come and remind you that you're existing, to come and remind you that you're beautiful. He walks into hopeless, strife-ridden places and posts messages like this. This is a high gang area, and young people are kind of brought into gangs, and he says someone who doesn't leave a mark behind hasn't really lived. Just a little counteractive to the gangs that are going there and being so successful, kind of scooping up all the young people that are around. Where the factories have collapsed, he says this: time stopped, but life goes on. Tatooine is famous for being the place where Star Wars, the Star Wars place of the same name, was filmed, and this is it. Used to be a wonderful oasis, but during over successive government decisions, it's now a desert. And he says, when you see the water, remember the source. Not if you see the water. Gosh, I hope the water comes back one day. When you see the water, remember the source. LC has now painted walls in all sorts of countries all around the world. Here's what he put up in a daycare centre in a Cape Town shanty town. Nelson Mandela, Mal mentioned before, it's always impossible until it's done. LC isn't walking into the streets of Tunisia and saying, everything is beautiful, here's a picture of a puppy. And he isn't walking into the streets of Tunisia and saying, everything is broken, let's blame someone. He's walking into the streets of Tunisia. He's walking into the broken, barren places of the world, and he's putting up a little message of hope. A little message of hope. He isn't creating sentimentality. He isn't creating cynicism. He is creating hope. Because there is one more option, and it's broken. It's broken, yes, but it's hope. We're going to take the reality of what we've found here, and we're going to treat it realistically, but there is hope. And friends, I wondered to myself if those of us who have got an inspirational text that's far more powerful than a Nelson Mandela quote, as wonderful as he is, we've got a text that is far more inspirational, right? And I wonder if those of us who are filled not just with good ideas and great kind of visions and things like that, but we're filled by the Holy Spirit of hope. And I wonder if those of us who are called not to have great wishes and things and plans and visions that we come up with, but we have a certain hope, what would happen if those of us who are Christian communicators in this world today were to find the broken, barren places, the metaphorical or literal broken, barren places, find ourselves a metaphorical wall and put up a message of hope from the heart of God, what would happen then? The first one is relatively easy. Just put up a Kitsch Jesus meme on your Facebook page. The second one is relatively easy, just rant and rave. You know what, the third one is actually quite hard because it can so easily jump back into the first. It takes work, it takes prayer, it takes reflection, it takes creativity, it takes a lot of work. And if you want to explore how we do this, here's 3 points that I'm just trying to work on myself and seeing if this might help. It's looking at what Christian hope is. What really is it? And I've got a resource page up there, which is, I'm not selling you anything, there's just a few links there that might actually help you with some of this as we move forward. Christian hope is first and foremost visionary. Christian hope does not look at the way things have been or the way things are right now. It looks at everything in light of what God is doing and where He is taking it. It looks in the light of Christian history, in the light where God's vision for the world will be complete. After creation came the fall. After fall came redemption begun by Jesus, and we're now kind of living in this outworking as He starts to spread His lordship all over the world and start to regather all the broken pieces and knit them back to one again. And so we see it from the future and then look back to that. And when you really get into this, there's some key passages for you: Isaiah 35, Isaiah 65 and 66, Revelation 21 and 22. If you immerse yourself in that vision as to what that future picture is going to look like, then you can kind of get a picture. What is God leading this to? And you'll find that it's a world of fulfilled longings, and it's a world of healed wounds, it's a world of radiant beauty, and it's a world of restored harmony. And so if you've got those 4 kind of ideas that can start driving the issues that you face today, that can help you to see where God is taking things in the future. Do you want to speak hope to a broken world? If you do, become immersed in God's vision for the world, take the sin and brokenness of it seriously, and then imagine what's going to be in the future and bring that into the present. Isn't this what Martin Luther King Jr. did when he climbed up the steps of the Lincoln Memorial there and he gave his famous I Have a Dream speech? He didn't get up there and rant and rave. He didn't get up there and just kind of say everything's fine. No, he looked into the future and he saw a future, God's future, where there would be complete and utter racial reconciliation. And what did he do? He did what the Lord's Prayer tells us to do. Pray, our kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. The only place where God's will is completely done is in heaven, and it will one day be completely done on earth when the kingdom of God comes in its fullness. He brings that into the present, and he says, now is the time for racial reconciliation. Isn't this what Jesus does on the Sermon on the Mount? When he gathers a whole bunch of people there, a whole bunch of little people with empty purses and crooked teeth, all the people that you wouldn't invite to the party, and he says, blessed are you the poor, For yours is the kingdom of heaven. Doesn't look like that now, but my goodness, it is. It's coming. Blessed are you who mourn, for you will be comforted. And on he goes, blessing all the wrong people because he is operating on the future vision. Are you with me? Does this make sense? Christian hope is, first of all, visionary. Secondly, it is practical. Right in the middle in the UK, we are just being surrounded now with, the largest migration of people, of refugees since World War II. And when the Syrian crisis really started to ramp up, I have to say, I felt paralyzed because all around us were hundreds of thousands of people knocking on any door they could to try and find a new home, fleeing from their own country, and they were going to other war-torn countries and they're going to other places and they're flooding throughout Europe. They're knocking on the UK's door saying, let us in, we just want a home, we just want a home. How do you deal with that? How do you respond to that? Tens and tens of thousands of people wanting to come to each of our cities. I felt paralyzed. And then I read a little article. It was an article on a website called Christian Today, written by a guy called Andy Walton, and the title was, The Syrian Crisis, 5 Things You Can Do. And in that 5 things you can do, he talked about how you can lobby and how you can petition and how you can pray and how you can even host a refugee, how you can donate. And straight away, I felt like I had hope. There was something I could do. It was bite-sized. I could do maybe 1, 2, 3 of those things. Suddenly, I had hope. Christian hope is visionary. We think about the big picture. We think about where God is taking the world and where he's leading all of history. But boy, it's practical. One of the best things you can do for your listeners who are listening to your stations, watching your TV programs, who are flicking through your feeds, is give them practical solutions. Imagine what this problem or this particular issue or this particular time would look like with Jesus fixing it up, that's the future, and then give us practical steps to lead towards there. It's visionary, it's practical, and Christian hope is redemptive. And friends, this has been the message of the last 6 years for me in the UK. I thought I knew this. I now know I didn't know it. Not in my depths, not in the very depths of my being. I love the UK. Cheese rolling chases, bog snorkeling, ancient wonders. I love all of that. But I never wanted to go to the UK. This is my wife, Merrin. If you haven't met her, she's smart, she's funny, she's pretty, she's taken. I'll never forget the day in the year 2000 when Merrin walked into the kitchen and she said, honey, I think it's time. And I said, time for what? And she said, time we started a family. And I said, what, right now, this moment? Fantastic, let's go. And it was time. We'd been married 5 years by that stage. We were in a stable position. We weren't kind of moving around from city to city. And it was time. And as any couple in that situation knows, who's made that decision knows, from that point on, every 28 days, you're looking for signs of success, are you not? Yeah. And it's very common for the first month for there to be expectation followed by disappointment. That's common, right? Next month, expectation, disappointment. And then often after that, expectation, excitement. Well, for us, the pattern went expectation, disappointment. Expectation, disappointment. Expectation, disappointment, expectation, disappointment, expectation, disappointment. After 9 months, we went and got some tests done. Now, this is a good Christian wholesome conference, so I'm going to speak in code from this point on and see if you are clever enough to pick up what I'm saying. One of those tests required me to provide, let's call it, a sample. A bunch of people over here who get it, a bunch of people over here who don't. Would you like more details? I can provide them for you if you like. Are we all on the same page? I had the opportunity to provide this sample by going into the clinic toilet, or the other option was Merrin and I could arrange what they called a home collection. Okay, again, these guys get it, these guys don't. Would you like more details? I can give them to you if you want. We're on the same page. All right, so you do it. Yeah, thanks very much. There's always one in every crowd. A little while later, Merrin and I are driving in the car. Merrin's holding a little specimen jar. She's holding it precious. It's wrapped up in a jumper to keep it warm. She's holding it like a precious little chick. And we found ourselves in this ludicrous position where we were parked across the road from the clinic. And I look at Merrin, and she looks at me. And I look at Merrin, and she looks at me. And I look at Merrin and I say, you take it in. She says, I don't want to take it in, you take it in. I said, I don't want to take it in, you take it in. She says, I'm not going to take it in, it is yours. So I don't want to take it. Well, what do? I walk up to the receptionist and say, hi, this is for you. I'm not going to take it in. She says, well, I'm not taking it in. Just then a lady walked down the footpath. I wound down the window. I said, if you're not going to take it in, love, I'm asking her to take it in. Merrin took it in. Oh, and you know what? That was probably one of the last times we laughed. For years to come, really. Because those tests revealed that there was a problem on my side, and that either without a divine miracle or some sort of technological assistance, our dreamt of child would be difficult to have. Any couple in that situation knows that what then kind of kicks in is a pendulum swing of emotions. And when you're up this end, you're thinking about all the opportunities that childlessness brings. You have more free time, right? You've got freedom to travel. You've got more disposable income. You can sit in a cafe on a Saturday morning reading page after page after paper. You can sip latte after latte. Mums and dads, are you feeling a little bit jealous right now? Doesn't take long, though, before the pendulum swings this way and the maternal-paternal drive kicks in, and you want to hold a little us. So that kicks in for us, and when we're up this end, we try all sorts of things to remedy our situation. We try special diets. Friends, we're all in the wrong business. We should just come out with our own diet. We would do really well. We tried special supplements. A little while we had kind of little pills and potions everywhere that I was taking to try and fix the situation. We tried chiropractic, and to this day, I cannot work out why. We tried healing prayer. We believe in a God who intervenes and does miracles. In 2003, a group gathered in our lounge room, gathered around me, prayed for me. As they laid hands on me and prayed for me, it was as if God walked in the room. Suddenly, I burst into tears. Merrin had never seen me burst into tears before. She'd never seen me cry. We'd been married a few years by this stage. She'd never seen me cry because I'm an Aussie male, right? And we don't cry. Ouch. But I cried this night, tears from I don't know where. And as a result, that night, it felt like something maybe had been freed, released, healed. And so there was expectation. Disappointment. 2007, friends come around for lunch, put their newborn baby boy into Merrin's arms. And she holds that boy and she does everything that you're supposed to do with somebody else's child, goo and gar, and say how beautiful it is, which is often a lie because often they're quite ugly. And not your child, of course. And I think, okay, maybe we're doing okay here. Maybe we're doing okay. We tried IVF for the first time in 2006. That hadn't worked. And I thought, well, maybe we're in a good place. Maybe it's okay. Merrin can hold somebody else's child and not run screaming in tears out of the room. The friends went home. I look around the house afterwards. Can't find her anywhere. Find her sitting on our bed, surrounded by a sea of used tissues. And she looks up at me and she says, do you think we should try adoption? 2008, the social worker gets up from our dining room table. She's just finished 8 months of assessment to work out whether we are suitable people to look after somebody else's biological child. As she goes to leave, she says, I know I shouldn't share my feelings. I'm a social worker. I should keep it to myself. But I'm going to say this anyway. You're an attractive couple. I don't think it'll take long until you're placed with a child. Just wait for the phone call. So we wait for the phone call. And after 2 years, the phone call hasn't happened. And Merrin comes to me at the end of those 2 years with tears in her eyes. She says, I can't live in this state anymore, always waiting for the phone call, expectation, disappointment every single day. Can we do something? Can we try IVF again? That's when we discover that you can't do IVF and remain on the adoption list. Good reasons why, but it's tough, right? So we either keep on staying on the adoption list to wait for that phone call, or we give it all away, 3 years investment by this stage and do this. So we decide to do this, and we just go all out. We'll do round after round until this works. An embryo is transferred. Expectation, disappointment. Another embryo is transferred. Another. Expectation always met with disappointment. By December of 2010, 10 years after that original conversation in the kitchen, we've got one embryo left, and we've decided this is it. Our lives have been on hold for too long. If there's no baby from this, we're moving on with our lives as a childless couple. By this stage, we're absolutely exhausted. Merrin's faith is shot. But our friends and family are praying, and because they're praying, there is just a little bit of expectation. And it's met with a phone call. It's Emily from the IVF clinic. And she says to Merrin, "It's looking good." And Merrin says, "Define the word good." Are we talking good, or are we talking good? And Emily says, "All your hormone levels are exactly where we'd expect them to be for a pregnancy." And it was that day, my friends, I discovered that when you tell your mother she's going to become a grandmother, she squeals. It's a great party trick. Try it tonight on the phone. It doesn't have to be true. Just try it. It's great. Family counselling is available on Medicare. So my mum squeals, my dad gives the Voysey victory laugh, friends and family are all finding out and they're texting us in tears, they can't believe it, 10 years wait, and we've been praying and fasting, they've been walking with us through this whole time, we can't believe it. You're going to have a child after all these years, and at the 11th hour, isn't that just like God? We drove from Sydney up to Brisbane to spend Christmas with our family, and on Christmas Eve, there's another phone call from Emily at the IVF clinic. She's got the results from the last blood test, and she says to Merrin, "I am so sorry," because there had never been a baby. Even the doctors had been fooled. And at that, Merrin had walked into our room, put the phone down, curled up in a fetal position, and that's where our 10-year dream of having a child ended. A little while after that, we're sitting by the Sydney harbour, talking about the future, and Merrin says, "The thought of life just going on as normal from this point on is too hard for me to take." Put my arm around her, husband to the rescue, and I said, "Well, what would you like, love? What would be a good consolation prize for us to kind of move on?" And she said, "I'd like to start again." All right, start again. "Yeah, I'd like to start again overseas." Overseas, okay. "Yeah, I'd like to start again overseas in Europe." In Europe? Merrin only had one dream, to become a mum. The only other dream she had was to live and work overseas. And this was a dream I could help make come true. But I didn't like the cost. Because over that same 10 years, ironically, things were going very well for me right here in Australia. I had dreamt of writing books, and I started to publish books, and people bought them. Started to want to speak at conferences, and I had great opportunities to speak in conferences. I had a dream of starting a Sunday night talkback show that explored life, faith, and culture from a Christian perspective, that engaged the mainstream mind of the Australian soul, that would be networked to stations all around Australia, and look at that. A whole bunch of other people had the same dream, and in 2006, out of Hope 103.2 in Sydney, networked first of all to Light FM in Melbourne, then a whole bunch of stations around there, we started the little show called Open House. Anybody heard of it? And that was a dream come true for me. And 5 years later, Merrin's asking me to give it up. Ask any publisher. There's not a lot of chance of an author being published in another country where nobody knows who they are. We resign our jobs, we pack our bags, we head out to the airport, and we fly out, and soon we find ourselves in our new country of the UK and our new town of Oxford. And very soon, that move to Oxford turns out to be Merrin's making. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick." What's the second part? "But a dream fulfilled is the tree of life." And that's exactly what it turns out to be for Merrin. It's no replacement for a child, but it's a good new beginning. For Merrin, coming to Oxford is like leaving the wilderness and entering the promised land. And for me, coming to Oxford is like leaving the wilderness and entering a brand new wilderness. BBC Radio isn't returning my calls. Nobody's asking me to speak at their conference. I approach 2 English publishers with a book project which I think is going to be a winner, and I'm turned down by both of them. Why? Who's Sheridan Voysey? We've never heard of him here. And very soon, my friends, all sorts of ugly emotions started to arise in me, all sorts of jealousy and all sorts of envy, all sorts of horrible things that I didn't think I was capable of, but my goodness, was I capable of them. And what happens when you go through this kind of experience is all the good but secondary identities most of us build our lives on get stripped away, and we have to find out who we are underneath those identities. My goodness, friends, you're a child of God, and that's what can never be taken away from you, right? Son, daughter, child of God, maybe one thing that can take that away from you. Death, unemployment, sickness, none nothing. You are a child of God. I had preached it, I had taught it, I had talked about it on open house. When you go through the wilderness, my goodness, you find out how deep that message has gone. And it had gone about this far, and it needed to go this far. A few months later, we got invited to spend a weekend with this couple. I'm wondering whether you know who they are. Adrian and Bridget Plass. Anybody read any of Adrian Plass's books? Normally in every crowd there's a whole bunch of people. Adrian and I were walking in a park one afternoon. He said, well, Sheridan, you've been here a few months now. How are you doing? I said, well, it's been a good move for Merrin. It's been a really good move for Merrin, and things are still up in the air for me. I guess, Adrian, what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at the upside of being childless. You know, we've got more time to travel, we've got more disposable income, we can sit in a cafe on a Saturday morning and read page after page of the paper and sip latte after latte. And Adrian says, I understand that, but that will only take you so far. He says, Sheridan, think about the cross. It was a dark, barbaric event. No matter which way we try and spin it, we can't find an upside to the cross. And Jesus didn't look for an upside to the cross. Instead, Sheridan, Jesus did something else entirely. He had my attention now. He said, Sheridan, have you thought about how many people Jesus ministered to while he hung on the cross? I said, well, what do you mean? He said, you think about it. Remember, he's hanging on the cross. There's his mother Mary. There's his friend John. He says, mother, here is your son. Son, here is your mother. While he's hanging on the cross, he's making provisions for his mother in her old age. He says, what about the person who was, the guy who was crucified next to him? What did he say to him? Today you'll be with me in paradise. What about the people who are crucifying him? Father, forgive them. They do not know what they do. What about the Roman centurion who had the revelation? Surely this was the Son of God. Something's going on there, ministry happening there, revelation happening there. And Sheridan, while Jesus is hanging on the cross, he's the sacrifice for our sins, he's ministering to us. Get this, Sheridan, all of this Jesus does while he's hanging on the cross before things come good at the resurrection. Now, I don't know about you, but I've often thought when I go through tough times, my goodness, this is going to be a great testimony when I get through this. Right? When the resurrection comes, you know, when the good things happen, when it all comes good, there might be upsides to being childless, Sheridan. But some days it'll be cold and dark and lonely. It'll be excruciating. But if you let him, out of your suffering will come opportunities to serve people in ways you otherwise never could. Later that night, we're sitting in his lounge room, roaring fire, sipping port. Friends, that just makes me an honorary Brit, even if I didn't have a passport. We're talking about my failing writing career, and out of the blue, Adrian says, have you thought about writing your story into a book? And you know what I said back to him? Which story is that? Wasn't even on my radar. He said the story about, you know, the conversation in the kitchen in the year 2000 and the prayer meeting in 2003 and the IVF in 2006 and adoption in 2008 and the phone call on Christmas Eve, all of that. I said, what do you mean, like a memoir? He said, yes. I said, no. For a start, Adrian, I don't want to be known as the infertility guy. It's not the brand I'm looking for, if you know what I mean. And besides, there's medical people who can write books about that. It's not my thing. And Adrian said, your story isn't about infertility. Your story is about broken dreams and starting again. Your story is about holding on to God when you don't understand him. Your story is about leaving what you know and going to what you don't know and then just seeing what's going to happen. I know a whole bunch of people that could really benefit from reading a story like that. I don't sleep that night thinking about the idea. I'm sure Merrin isn't going to be up for it because she's been the private one between the two of us. She goes away, prays about it, comes back and says, I think you're supposed to do this. In 2012, start writing the story. It's rejected by an English publisher. Why? Who's Sheridan Voysey? And then it finds its way into the office of the biggest Christian publisher in the world, Thomas Nelson, in Nashville. God bless you, Americans. They don't look at my fame, they look at the material, and they say, we need to publish this. And within days of that little book called Resurrection Year making its way into the world, I start getting messages like this, something like 300 of them now. My son has Asperger's and my marriage is in tatters because of my husband's addiction. All my dreams are gone, but I've just read Resurrection Year and now I can start again and I can start finding God again. Our baby was stillborn. Now my husband has left me. Thank you for writing so honestly. I'm tired of hearing Christian success stories. We get that over and over and over again, friends, and let me just drill down deep into that, because if all we ever do from stages like this is talk about the miracle outcomes, if all we ever do from stages like this, or through our channels, through our radio, and through our TV channels, and through our social media feeds, if all we ever do is give the great miracle Disney ending where everything works out well in the end, there's a whole bunch of people that always walk around, they leave that room feeling like they're the most cursed people on earth. Wasn't it interesting, the research that came out a couple of nights ago when it was declared here, that actually the miracle stories are actually one of the lower things that starts to turn people, non-Christians, off the gospel. I was fascinated by that. But now I know, because very few people get the miracle. I believe in an intervening God, I believe in a miracle-working God, and I continue to pray for healing for other people. But I tell you what, we don't just serve a God who does miracles, we serve a God who redeems things. He takes the outcome of the cross. Didn't take Jesus before the cross happened. Through the cross, then brings the resurrection. It's in the midst. We serve a God who redeems, recycles the crap, and that's a Greek word. Recycles the crap into a beauty that otherwise couldn't have come if the crap hadn't been there in existence. I was speaking at a big church in Perth, Riverview Church. Guy walks up after the service and he says, I haven't been to church in 26 years. All this week I had this feeling that I had to get to a church service. Did a Google search. This is the first church that came up. Everything you've talked about tonight, broken dreams and new beginnings, is exactly what I needed to hear. I've gone through a marriage breakdown. I've lost my business. It's like I was meant to be here. I said, you were meant to be here. The Father is drawing you into his family. Gave him a Bible, prayed for him, got him connected with the church. Immediately after him, a couple walks forward. The guy says, I haven't been to church in years. And the girl says, I've never been to church. But all this week, we had this strange sense that we should get to a church service. We did a Google search. This was the first church that came up. And everything you've shared tonight on broken dreams and new beginnings is exactly what we needed to hear. It's almost like we're meant to be here. You are. Father's drawing you into his family. Gave him a Bible, got him sorted out. Speaking at a church in York, in England, a few months ago, guy comes up to me after a church service. You know where's this heading, don't you? I haven't been to church in years. I never go to church. I was just walking past the church and I felt like something was drawing me in. Everything you've talked about tonight, broken dreams and new beginnings, is exactly what I needed to hear tonight. Because tonight I'd planned to take my life. But now I'm not going to. Because now I'm a child of God. Now I'm a child of God. Now I'm a child of God. So get that, friends. A lady who's got a child with Asperger's and a marriage is in tatters and everything, she finds hope. And a lady who's just had a stillborn child, she finds hope. And a couple that haven't been to church for years, they find hope. And a guy who's about to take his life finds hope. It's all hope, 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 hope. And get this, it's all come out of Maren and I not getting the Disney ending. Now, it has taken a little bit of for me to actually get my mind around that and trying to work that out. What's God doing with that? And it all comes back to this. It comes back to the way our God works. He works through redemption. So, friends, the world has got enough sentimentality. The world has got enough cynicism. You, as a distinctly Christian communicator, are called to give them hope. And you know, if you want to speak hope to a broken world, the way you do it is to not just give the miracle stories, give those. God's an amazing intervening God. Give the miracle stories, but also give the stories of those people who keep on walking through the trial in faith, because it turns out, as the research showed a couple of nights ago, those are the stories that happen to shout loudest in our culture. World is tired of cynicism. World is tired of sentimentality. My goodness, it is hungry for hope. And you're called to give it to them. If you do that, then I believe, friends, you will leave a legacy. God bless you as you do it.